Hi there, and welcome to this next video in the yt-napari tutorial series. In this video, I'll be introducing you to some other Napari plugins that you can use with data that you've loaded in via yt-napari. We'll talk about how you can go about finding and installing other plugins, and then I'll walk you through some simpler examples. So all of these are going to be more focused on extracting values from the data that you've loaded in, making some plots with those values. In the next video, I'll introduce some other plugins, and we'll do a bit of image segmentation, and it'll get a bit more complex. So this video will stick to the simpler plotting plugins, and so we will just to give a shout out to the plugins that we'll actually use. We're going to use this napari-plot-profile, the napari-simpleitk-image-processing plugin, the napari-properties-plotter plugin. And so in terms of requirements, we'll be sticking with our same old virtual environment that we've created back in the first video, but we'll also install these plugins to that, and I'll walk you through how to do that. And today I'll be using the Enzo Tiny Cosmology sample dataset. Just the final time step in that is fine. We won't be doing any time series analysis in this video. And thanks again to CCI. So in terms of how to find plugins that you might want to use with data that you've loaded in with yt-napari, there's a number of ways. You can just do whatever search engine you use. You can just search for what you want to do, followed by Napari plugin, and that'll turn up a lot of results. There's also this useful Napari Hub website here. So it's naparihub.org is the main page here, and so this is a listing of all the Napari plugins out there that have registered themselves with the hub. And so you can search this, by keyword, plugin name, or anything you want. So if you do a search for yt-napari, you'll get the page for yt-napari. But in this video, we want to actually look at some other sorts of plugins. So, search for, we're going to be doing some plotting, so if you just search for plot, a number of things come up: napari-plot, napari-plot-profile, napari-properties-plotter. So we'll actually use plot profile and properties plotter here today. And so if you click on one of these, it'll typically will give you a readme page. Depending on the plugin, this will have different information. It's also useful to point out that over here you can go to the project site, and that'll typically point you to the GitHub repository, which can be useful. And then also the PyPy page, also useful. So that you can kind of search for whatever you might need. So some other search. So the next video we'll do some image segmentation. So if we search for that, you'll see quite a lot of plugins that pop up, and so there's a lot here. With lots of different options. Allen Cell Segmenter is one pretty well developed one. Has some nice videos in the documentation page too. There's the full documentation. But so in any case, we are not going to play with segmentation today. We're just going to be sticking in some plot functionality. And so there's a number of ways to install plugins. The simplest, maybe not the simplest, but the way I typically do it is I find my plugin, and then I just check out the PyPy package and do a pip install. Can also though. Let's get rid of that. And I'm going to activate my environment, yt-napari tutorials, and let's just start up the Napari GUI real quick. So you'll notice in this plugins directory there is this install uninstall plugins. So if you open that up, you'll get a list of available plugins. These are all the plugins up on the Napari hub, and then you can just type the name of the plugin you want, hit install, and it'll install it into your environment. But as I said, I typically will just do pip install. So let's go ahead and install all of these things. So we're going to pip install napari-plot-profile, and so this one will let us draw some lines and get some measurements along the lines we plot. We will install pip install napari-properties-plotter. This one is another way to make some plots based on clicking within the Napari viewer to make measurements. And then we're also going to install one image processing toolkit. So this napari-simpleitk-image-processing. So this gives you a lot of stuff. We're going to use just one little part of it, just to have a way to rescale our image layers for part of the process that we're going to walk through. And after you've installed all those, and you start with Napari, you'll see in this plugins a lot more than just yt-napari. So there's the yt-plot-profile, and the property plotter that we're going to touch. And then you also will have this tools folder. So this has a lot of, almost all of this came from the simpleitk plugin here. So there's a lot of filtering methods for image processing, and then some segmentation methods that we're going to talk a little bit about in the next video. And today we're actually just going to use this filtering rescale intensity option, but we'll need to load in some data to do that first, so let's do that. So I closed down the Napari GUI because I'm actually going to do this from a Jupyter notebook today. And so let's import Napari and get our Napari viewer. And I'm actually going to load the data through the GUI, but I want to have it in this notebook so that I could show you how to extract some of the data that we sample. Okay, so let's get started by loading in some data from YT. I'm gonna just use that Enzo tiny cosmology dataset, and we'll go down to the last time step, and we're gonna load in some data. So we're gonna load in standard Enzo density field, cover the whole domain at the default resolution. We're going to load in Enzo temperature, and we're going to load in one more. Let's do Enzo metal density. Hit load selections. Just double check that stuff is happening. Great. Cool. So we have some data. Let's close our reader plugin there. And let's adjust these color maps a little. So first one, we got our metal density, got our temperature field, and let's just make that red, and density will keep grayscale for now. And we're in 2D view, switching over to 3D view. This is our metal density field. And let's go back to 2D. Okay. So let's play around with some plotters. So the first thing that we want to do, so we're going to use this napari plot profile functionality. And to use this one, we're gonna add a line through our data set. So down here, there's these options for adding new types of layers. So there's point layers, shapes layers, and labels layers. So we'll add a new shapes layer. And so this is just fairly simple drawing functionality where you can add multi-lines, lines, polygons of various types. To start, we're just going to add a line. So we'll just hit that button, and let's adjust the colors here a little bit. And I'll make it wider. Yeah, so we're in 2D view over here, and I'm just adjusting the slider to step through space here, just to pick a fun slice to draw a line through. So to draw the line, just click on the screen, drag, let go, you get this line. And now what we can do, now that we have this line, is go up to Plugins, napari-plot-profile, and plot-profile. And what this will do is it will, for each of the layers you have, it'll just move along this line and sample the intensity of that layer along that line. And so you get out along that path the measurements for the bottom one here is the metal density, the middle one here is the density, and the top one here is temperature. And so it takes the values from those arrays along that path. And as you can see, we're these different fields cover fairly different ranges in scale. And so one thing that can be useful if you're just trying to look at sort of how these fields co-vary along the path is to rescale each of these layers so that they're on the same scale in the y-axis. And so let's do that. So we're going to use this tools filtering rescale intensity plugin here. And you see in parentheses the plugin that originates the plugin name, because as you add more image processing plugins, you'll get various functionality added to the folders. So the parentheses just tells you which plugin it came from. Yeah, so let's hit that rescale intensity button. And so the options here are the image layer that you want to rescale, and then the bounds that you want to scale it to. And so we'll go between 0 and 1 for each of them. So you hit run, and we get out the result of our density rescaling. And as you hit run over and over, it just overwrites this layer here. So we will duplicate this layer, double click, and call this density scaled. Now we go back to our rescale intensity. It's running on temperature. Right click, duplicate, temperature scaled, and let's also scale the metal density. And we'll just keep that layer as the final layer. Cool. So let's apply the same color maps that we used down below. And click the little eyeball here to deactivate the original scaled layers. And let's just move our line up top again. So now, close that, and now we go back to our Napari plot profile widget up here, and you can see that it's already rescaled itself. So it's updated so that we're now just looking at the scaled layers here, and now we're, all the data is between 0 and 1 along those lines, and you can see how the fields co-vary a little bit better. Yeah, so once you have this this image over here on the right, you can actually extract those values along the line if you want. So if you hit this list values, it'll just pop up a little table of the actual values here. You can copy it or save it as CSV file. But when you hit that list values, you'll see it says properties of density scaled. So that means that this density scaled layer here now has an extra attribute that we can extract. So if you go back to the Jupyter notebook, V here is our active viewer object. So v.layers is our list of layers that we have here. So we want our density scaled layers where that properties ended up. And so there is now a properties attribute. So this is just a dictionary that has all of our values. And so the keys here, we have our density scaled position 0, 1, 2, so this is XYZ positioning, and then the intensity of density along the line, and also the distance along the line. And then for each of the fields, we have our density, our temperature, and our scaled metal density. So the positions will be the same, but the intensities will vary between each of these. And so, for example, if you wanted to extract the density scaled intensity values, and let's say let's also pull out our metal density scaled. Now we'll just have our two arrays corresponding to those two fields along the line, and if you wanted to, we could use matplotlib to plot that. And actually, let's do a scatter plot here instead. And we get a scatter plot of, let's see, X density, scaled density versus the metal density. So you can see this. We have like this one pretty linear trend and some points that fall off that linear trend. And yeah, so you can do that in the notebook. You can also, though, using a different plugin, do a very similar thing. So we've stored our density, or the values along this line, in our density properties. And so if we now go to plugins, property plotter, we get a different plotting interface down below. And so there's a number of options over here. So there's the layer that you want to use. And so what this does is it accesses the properties attribute of the layer that you chose. So since our properties along the line are stored in our density scaled layer, we select that layer, and then our x-axis now has all of those properties, all of the fields in that properties dictionary available. So if you just click a single value for the x-axis, it'll give you a histogram. So that's a histogram of the scaled density along the field, or along the line. Temperature, metal density, and then if you add, so I just switched the x-axis to the distance, so this is the distance along that line in image pixel units. And you can add a y-axis, so if we want to look at our scaled density, oops, keep that distance, keep that. So this is the density intensity along the path length, and then we can similarly add a second, so temperature intensity and metal density intensity. So you can basically see that we've just recreated the plot above using the property plotter with the data that was extracted by the napari-plot-profile plugin. And we can actually get that to match even more directly by changing all of these to line plots. Yeah, so this is kind of a useful way to quickly check out how data varies along paths, and to that effect, we'll walk through a couple of other ways that we can construct paths to plot against. So let's go ahead and close that. For now, we'll close the profile, and let's delete our shape here. Yeah, so in that example where we were adding individual lines, you can actually add a path as well, and so this will work just as the single line did. So if we start clicking and adding points to trace out this filament of high metal density, double click to finish it, and now we go back to plugins, plot profile. This distance now is the distance along the path, and then we have all our separate samples and list the values to store those samples in our density properties layer, and pull up the property plotter again, and now what we get out is the plots along that path, and this is kind of useful as a way to quickly make a histogram along a filament, for example. So this is the density, it's histogram of density, scaled density values along that path. Additionally, let's click out of that for now. If we hide all of our scaled layers and click and unhide all of our original raw layers, and then hit refresh. Okay. Yeah, so I had to click on the shapes layer again to refresh that. So now we're back to our unscaled layers. So these are all in the code length of the respective variables. And now if we list the values, we'll store the unscaled values and go back to the property plotter, and now we get our unscaled density and temperature and metal density histograms along that path. And these, the y-axis or the x-axis here, these are base 10 log values of the intensity, since when we initially loaded in the data we did take the log, but these are in the original code length units of each of the fields. And one more variation, that might have been off screen a little bit, sorry about that, but one more interesting variation. Let's close these again, and we will again use this to select our shape and then hit delete to remove it. So one of the features of Napari generally, so this is a 3D data set, right? And we can use our slider to pass through it. So when you add, so let's do this with the point data first. So if we add a points layer, you can click this to start adding points. So as you add points in 2D, Napari will record the third dimension that they were stored in. So if we move our slider up, just add some points along this filament until it disappears. And I'm not doing a great job at that. Just kind of doing it pretty quick. yeah, let's take a look. Now let's switch back to 3D view, and so now when you rotate this, you can see that I've added all of those points in 3D. Didn't really pick out an interesting feature that time, but but in any case, let's just take a quick look. So if you go over to Tools, Measurement Tables, you can hit this Measure Intensity at Point Coordinates, and then select our points data and the layer that you want to sample, and hit Run, and it'll give you all of the values of density at this. Oh, it's this intensity column. So the intensity column here is the value of the field that we sampled, and this time it gets stored as properties of points. So if you go back to the notebook and again check out our layers, so the points layer, this one here, is the last one that we added, and so let's just pull that out. And so now we have all of our intensity values of the density field at that point, at all of those points that we manually added. And so similarly, just deleted the points there. Let's go back to 2D, find a more interesting spot. Okay, so if we start, now we're back in the shapes layer here. Make that visible again. I'm going to switch to path. So just like the points, when you click in space in 2D, it does record that third dimension. So we're going to create a path that kind of follows one of these filaments. So let's initialize our path, and then I'm going to use the arrow keys to step through this. And every so often I'll just click to add. Oh, right. Yeah, so sometimes it doesn't, when you're adding points in 3D like this, it doesn't show up right away until you switch layers again. Right. So this is, a little bit arbitrary. I'm moving pretty quick through this. And now let's go take a look in 3D again. And now you can see that I created this path that follows one of these filaments along. And now, when we make all of our layers visible again, and now when we go to our plot profile, the shape it's using now follows that filament along in 3D space. So let's go back to 3D, kind of look at this. So a good angle, drop the opacity a little bit. So we're starting over here from at 0, increasing distance, and so not much happening until you hit this high point in the metal density that drops, and then it's that series of high points. And now if we hit list values, it gets stored in our Enzo density layer properties, and again we can go back to the property plotter, and so we're on the Enzo density where all of our values are stored, and we can check out the histograms of all of our different fields along that filament path. There's temperature, and there's the metal density, and just like before, we can add some plots that show how the two different variables covary along the path. So there's density and versus metal density, and here's the temperature intensity versus density. Or you can plot each of these variables along the full path length using the distance variable. Great. So all of this has just been one example of how you use some of the interactive plotting plugins that work with data once it's in Napari, and we walked through how to actually sample the data and look at the data values along paths. And next time we'll actually do a bit of image segmentation to try to divide up the image that we've loaded in according to variations in our field in different ways, and that'll rely on some other plugins, or more specifically some of the other tools in this simpleitk plugin. So we will step through that next time, and thanks for watching.